5. I tell you, I tend to move around a lot. I'm having some trouble with my back. And ever since Riley asked me to come and speak at the Golden Age Day, I've been hurting a little bit. I don't know if there's a correlation or not, but if you see me leaning on the pulpit, I apologize. I don't get to do that, but it just feels better. I was listening to a preacher online some time ago, and he was telling a true account from their congregation of a sister that everyone loved who was gravely ill. And I don't remember the illness that she was struggling with, but it was something that it was really bad. And most of us have had experiences like that. There are people probably you could name in your congregation right now that are just a daily part of the prayer life of your congregation. I know that we have daily family worship in our home, and there are certain people that we just pray for them every day. Right? I mean, they have really, maybe they're facing cancer, or maybe they're facing some other illness. There's a sister in our congregation right now who just lost her leg, it's hard on her. I would not. She's obviously bearing the weight of it, but it's hard on the whole church. We weep with those who weep, and I think that's what we're supposed to be. But anyways, this sister was really in a bad way, and a lot of the ladies decided that they were going to go over and they wanted to have a prayer service for the sister. And so all of these women met up at the church, and when they got there, there were almost 250 women who were there. That's pretty encouraging, right? 250 women who had all gathered together to pray for this sister. And I've seen things like that just a couple times where people would touch that nerve in a congregation, and they're so beloved, and everyone is just so torn up about it. And they each took a turn going around the room praying for this sister that she might be healed. And he was telling the story because what he wanted to get to was his wife's prayer. He said that when it was his wife's turn to pray, that everyone bowed their head, and she began praying, "Lord, heal her." That's where we need to start. Lord, heal this person. That's why we're praying, right? If we truly believe that there is a God who can heal, then we ought to be praying for Him to heal, and we ought to pray that prayer with confidence. I've done a lot of hospital visitation in my time, and I think early on, I didn't pray for healing. I prayed for a lot of things. Pray for them to get out of the hospital. Pray for them to do better. But now I just want to put it forth. Lord, heal this person. I don't know what it is that they're dealing with. They may have, some problem with their intestines. They may have a problem with their heart. They may have a problem with cancer. I'm just telling you that the main reason that I'm coming before you is, God, I want you to heal them. I want you to do something in their life that wouldn't happen if I wasn't taking the time to pray. And that's exactly how she began her prayer. Lord, heal her. And probably not much that anybody thought a whole lot about. That's what you're supposed to pray for. But she continued in her prayer. She said, Lord, heal her. And if not, teach her to die well. Give her joy in believing. Give her a heritage for her husband and her children. Open her eyes so that she can see what is yet to come. Lord, teach her to die well. And as those statements began to be assimilated by that group of ladies who were gathered, probably no surprise to you, there were some women who thought that was completely inappropriate. You don't talk about those things. We're here to ask for healing, which they were. But she saw a deeper reality, a deeper spiritual reality that I just love the terminology die well. You know, in a culture that doesn't have many taboos anymore, we don't have many taboos in our culture. Do we? People talk about anything and everything, and many things that they ought not talk about, people talk about. You want to know what someone thinks about politics? You want to know what they think about sports? You want to know what they think about sexuality? Everybody has an opinion, and they think you're entitled to hear their opinion. That's the world that we live in. We just don't have taboos anymore. This is one subject, the subject of death, still has a great deal of taboo around it. You want to suck all the air out of the room? How many of you want to hear a conversation about how my grandpa died? Did you feel that? I mean, I felt it, right? The truth is, I don't want to have that conversation. I was there. I can tell you about it, but that's not something I enjoy talking about. Matter of fact, I told my family what I was going to speak about today, and I was going to speak on the subject of dying well. And they said, "You're going to talk about what?" I mean, boy, talk about a kind of a downer of a subject, right? I mean, it's just, we just don't talk about it. But it's something that we need to talk about. Because every one of us are going to die. I don't know if it's soon or later. I don't know if it's today or 50 years from now. I don't know. You don't know either. But every one of us is going to die. And when we die, I want to die well. I want to die. I want to die with joy in my heart. I want to die and have my children gather around me, whether it be at my bedside or at my graveside, filled with incredible hope and confidence. I want to die knowing that I have left an example. Knowing that I have come and I have fought the good fight. For all of those who would come and fight that fight behind me. I want to enter into eternity without fear in my mind. It's a rare thing, but it's something a child of God can have. I think about people whose lives have impacted me, and in particular, I think of two people. I think of Brother Mac Hovey, who in his late 40s developed a brain tumor, elder in the church there in Manchester, Tennessee, where I preached. I think of Brother Freddie Hale, who died from ALS, an elder in the church in his late 40s, early 50s. Probably the most excruciating death I've ever witnessed. I wouldn't call it a privilege to have witnessed. It was quite horrific. But when I think about their deaths, man, those men, even in their death, even in facing terrible circumstances, they taught me something about faith and about my walk with Christ. They died well. And I want to die. When I die, I want to die like that. See, in the church, we talk about the gospel. And I think we don't all too often think of the gospel as something that God has given us for the purpose of dying well. We tend to think of the gospel as something that God has given us so that we might live well. And we do live well, do we not? I mean, if there's something redeeming about me as a husband, it's the influence of the gospel. If there's something redeeming about my wife as a wife or as a mother, it is the influence of the gospel. And when I fail to reflect that, I'm not a good husband, and I'm not a good employee, and I'm not a good citizen. I get all of that. The gospel does impact our lives. But too often we treat the gospel as if its goal was to make us a good citizen. As if its goal was to make us nice American citizens. That is not the goal of the gospel. The goal of the gospel is to prepare us. To prepare us to be reconciled with God. So it is to bring us to a place where we might be reconciled with God. The goal of the gospel is, and by the way, and everything in our walk in the gospel is to bring us to a point where we will go to be with God. If you have your Bibles, open them up to 2 Corinthians chapter 5. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, they are no doubt words that are familiar to everyone gathered here, but Paul is going to make this, going to have this discussion about life and about the nature of life. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. He says, we know that if our earthly house, this tent, is destroyed, that we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan, earnestly desiring to be clothed with our habitation which is from heaven. If indeed, having been clothed, we shall not be found naked. For we who are in this tent groan, being burdened, not because we want to be unclothed, but further clothed, that mortality may be swallowed up by life. This reality that this is not who us is. This body, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that this body is not the culmination of everything that I am, that I exist outside of this body. This body is just a tent. It's just a tabernacle. It's just a temporary dwelling place. And we're not masochistic in the sense that, somehow we just can't wait to die. That's not what he's saying. But when we do die, he says we don't have to be fearful of those things because we're going to be clothed. We're not going to be found unclothed on those days. All that to say, in verse 5, as he's speaking about this, Now he who prepared us for this very thing is God, who has also given us the Spirit as a guarantee. He who has prepared us for this very thing. Some of your Bibles may say, He who has prepared us for this very purpose. What is the thing he's talking about? What is the purpose he's talking about? He's talking about the Spirit leaving the body. Everything in our life is building up to that point. We think about our life building up, right? We have graduations in life. We're going to graduate from high school. Everything in my life, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to get married. I'm going to have children. I'm going to be a grandfather. I'm closer to being a grandfather than I am to be a new parent. Right? I'm kind of in the middle, but I've already decided I'm going to be a great grandfather. Okay? I'm building a tree house. I didn't build as a father. It's going to be great. I'm looking forward to this. Okay? Everything is building towards these moments, man. I'm going to retire, right? Like the culmination of everything. I want to go and live on the coast of Georgia somewhere, and we tend to think like that, don't we? Right? He says that's not what life is about. That's not the culmination of our life. As a matter of fact, what we're really leading towards, the great culmination that everything in our life is coming towards, is this moment when our spirit leaves the body. We call that death. Listen, that's not the end, that's the beginning. That's the beginning for the child of God. To understand, that's what Paul's saying there in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. But yet, for some reason, we don't like to talk about it. We don't even like to think about it, do we? I would ask you to raise your hand if you were uncomfortable, but I think most of us are uncomfortable with this subject. But it's something we need to think about. Whether you're the youngest person here, you're the oldest person here. Matter of fact, in the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 2, there are those famous words. When Solomon says in Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 2, he says, "It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting." Isn't that one of those strange verses in the Bible? How many of us enjoy going to the funeral home? Anybody? We got a couple days vacation, spring break coming up. You know what we're going to do? Tuesday night, we're going to the funeral home, buddy. Right? You excited about that? No. Nobody likes going to mean, we're going over to Riley's and he's buying wings for everybody, and it's going to be, bring your own dessert. We're just going to have a great time. That sounds like fun? Right? That sounds like fun. He says, it's better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting. Why is that? Because most of us, we don't want to go to a funeral home. Here's the reason. For that is the end of all men, and the living will take it to heart. See, because I don't like to think about it. Matter of fact, I don't think about it for the most part. Right? That subject of death, we just don't. I don't want to think about it. Don't want to think about it. Don't want to think about it. Right? But when you go to the funeral home, you know what you're forced to think about? You are forced to think about death. You're forced to think about it. I'm a preacher, right? And I struggle sometimes. People have no idea how many times I've preached my mother's funeral. My mother's alive and well, okay? But you have no idea how many times I've preached my mother's funeral. That every time I go to preach a funeral and I see a son or a daughter and they're grieving and that's their mother, I can't help but think, that could be my mother. It could be my mother. It could be me. Right? I mean, whether you want to think about it or not, that's why people don't like to stick around a funeral home very long. Right? I got to get out of here because I don't like thinking about this. Right? I mean, especially when you go to a funeral for a young person. Oh, wow. I mean, it just kind of brings this reality that today could actually be my day. I don't like to think about it, but he said it's a good thing to think about. It's something we need to think about. Because that's the culmination of our life. That's what everything in our life is leading us towards. And so in those moments when we're forced to think about those things, because the death rate, you know what the death rate is in our country? You know, don't you, right? It's 100%. That's the death rate. It's 100%. And it always has been, and it always will be. But we struggle with this concept. Not that we're going to die, but to think about it. You know, back in World War II, in the time of war, there's always a great deal of thought about death. And some of those thoughts came from C.S. Lewis that really just challenged me in my mind. And I want to read just a little bit of some things that he wrote. C.S. Lewis was an interesting individual because he had actually fought in World War I in trench warfare. Right? And had seen thousands of lives that were lost, watched most of his friends that were killed. And after World War I, he went on to be a scholar, a theologian, and different things. You've probably read some of his books. But when World War II came along, at Oxford University, they were struggling with the students. And this idea that we're here in the midst of academia, and there are people out there living and dying, and how do we process these things? The truth is the chaplain didn't have very good answers to it. Right? The chaplain of that place didn't really know what to say, and so he invited C.S. Lewis to come and speak to the students at Oxford. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can Google it. There are lots of different formats of this. But his speech was entitled "Learning in Wartime," and it's lengthy what I'm going to read, but I think it was helpful. Because he went on to talk to those students about how do we reconcile this idea that there are people who are dying around us while we're sitting here going to school, right? We're sitting here studying the finer points of theology, and let me just give you a few excerpts. He asked the question: is it not like fiddling while Rome burns? Now, he says, it seems to me that we shall not be able to conquer these questions until we have put them by the side of certain other questions, which every Christian ought to have asked himself in peacetime. I spoke just now of fiddling while Rome burns, but to a Christian, the true tragedy of Nero must not be that he fiddles while the city was on fire, but that he fiddles on the brink of hell. You must forgive me for my crude monosyllable. I know that many wiser and better Christians than I in these days do not like to mention heaven and hell even in a pulpit. And I know, too, that nearly all the references to this subject in the New Testament come from a single source. But then that source is our Lord Himself. People will tell you it is St. Paul, but that is untrue. These overwhelming doctrines are dominical. They are not really removable from the teaching of Christ or of His church. And if we do not believe them, our presence in this church is great tomfoolery. He goes on to talk about the fear of war. And he says the third enemy is fear. War threatens us with death and pain. No man, and specifically no Christian who remembers Gethsemane, need try to attain a stoic indifference about these things. But we can guard against the illusions of the imagination. We think of the streets of Warsaw and contrast the deaths there suffered with an abstraction called life. But there is no question of death or life for any of us. Only a question of this death or of that. Of a machine gun bullet now or a cancer 40 years later. What does war do to death? It certainly does not make it more frequent. 100% of us die, and that percentage cannot be increased. It puts several deaths earlier, but I hardly suppose that is what we fear. Certainly when the moment comes, it will make little difference how many years we have behind us. Does it increase our chance of a painful death? I doubt it. As far as I can find out, what we call natural death is usually preceded by suffering. And the battlefield is one of the very few places where one has a reasonable prospect of dying with no pain at all. Does it increase our chances of dying at peace with God? I cannot believe it. If active service does not persuade a man to prepare for death, then what conceivable concatenation of circumstances would? Yet war does do something to death. It forces us to remember it. The only reason why cancer at 60 or paralysis at 75 do not bother us is that we forget them. War makes death real to us. And that would have been regarded as one of its blessings by most of the great Christians of the past. They thought it good for us to always be more aware of our mortality. And I am inclined to think that they were right. It goes on. It's a long speech, but you get the point that he's making. We tend to elevate these different ideas in our life when the truth is, the struggle is that they're just making us aware of it. They're just making us aware of it. Death is coming. Judgment is coming. The Hebrew writer said, you know this in Hebrews 9 and verse 27. It is appointed for man to die once, but after this, the judgment. There is a very real place called heaven, and there is a very real place called hell. And one day, each one of us is going to spend an eternity there. That's the reality. That when we truly come to understand, it changes us. If we will embrace it, it motivates us. If we are to die well, we must be prepared for the judgment day. If you're not prepared for the judgment day, you cannot die well. I've been to a lot of funerals where a lot of great things were said about a lot of people. I've read about degrees that were honored, and money that was given, and funny stories that were told. But I can tell you that when someone asks me if I'll preach a funeral, I really got one question. Is he a Christian? Please tell me he's a Christian. Because if he's a Christian, then my job is easy. If he's not a Christian, no matter what I might be able to say that could bring comfort, my job is very difficult. That's what really matters. You know, the truth is, I don't want my children. I don't want my grandchildren that I've never met. I don't want them to have a stumbling block in their path because they can't get over my lack of faithfulness. You ever studied with someone and they see the truth of the gospel? They see the truth of Christ's sacrifice and the nature of the church, but they can't get over this one thing. Well, what about Grandma? Well, what about my grandpa? What about my for them to follow in the paths of Christ in their mind is tantamount with their own condemnation of their parents or of their grandparents, and therefore they will not submit. That happens all the time when you study the Bible with people, right? I don't always know what to say in those moments. Different sermon for a different time. But I can tell you in the context of our sermon today, I don't want to be that for my children. When it comes time for them to grow in Christ, when it comes time for my grandson, Wesley Hazel Jr., listening, right? When it comes time for him to become a Christian or to walk with Christ, I don't want him saying, yeah, but I mean, I love my grandpa, and I don't want them to have that. I want them to be able to look back and say, I have a godly heritage. I may not be able to tell you everything about my father, everything about my grandfather, but I know that he loved the Lord. I know that he served the Lord and that he sacrificed for the Lord. Even if they ignored it during my life, I don't want to be that stumbling block. I want to die well. The Hebrew writer, speaking in Hebrews chapter 4, verses 9 through 10, of a rest and a looking for a new heavens and a new earth. And he says, therefore remains a rest for the people of God. Verse 10, for he who has entered his rest has himself also ceased from his works, as God did from his. Those are words as we begin to see the suffering of life, I think, take on new strength. They take on new meaning. If you've seen people who have suffered, I mentioned earlier, watching a man who had Lou Gehrig's disease. Oh, what a terrible disease. If you ever spent the night with someone dying of emphysema, where every single breath was a battle. If you've seen people's bodies torn apart by MS, and we could go on and on, could we not? With the ailments of life. With men who were once strong, who can barely walk from here to there. That's what life does. And every moment of their life is a fight and it is a battle. And death is not a bad thing. Death is a place of comfort. Death is a place where that MS doesn't exist anymore. Death is a place where they don't need that cane, they don't need that oxygen tank, where their minds that once were strong but now have been decimated, where their minds are no longer clouded. Listen, that's amazing. That's a blessing. That's not a scary thing. What life teaches you is that there are a lot of things in life that are worse than dying. Oh, they're not. Have we not seen those things? Have we not experienced those things? But yet we tend to forget about that. I don't want to be scared of death. I want to think of it as that rest. I have a good friend who has no body from this day. He's been that way as long as I've known him. Got ran over by a train. Beat up by some drug dealers and left on a train track. The doctor said the great miracle of his life is that he has no memory of it. Because if he did, and if he remembered the pain, his mind would probably never be right. He walks, got like a Goodyear tire right here on the floor. He's got little pedals and he pushes himself along. He's lived his whole life. Probably could teach not could. Teaches one of the greatest classes on the book of Job of anyone I've ever heard teach it. I think he knows about suffering. I think he knows about hardship. I look forward to the day when we're going to stand eye to eye. Because his body is going to be healed from those things. Because of that rest. Someone once said, when speaking of all of the ailments that a particular individual had, and they were describing what was wrong with them, they said that, well, really, there's nothing wrong with them that a good resurrection wouldn't cure. Right? I mean, that's kind of like the best way to put it. Right? I mean, this is I just need a resurrection. That idea that I'm going to a better place, a place where there are no tears, a place where there are no sorrows. It is a place of rest. Hebrews chapter 11, we see that great hall of faith. Oh, there are some great people in that hall of faith, aren't there? We see people going out to a place where they don't even know where they're going, being willing to sacrifice their own son. We see Noah building the ark. We see Gideon fighting for the Lord. I mean, on and on we go. These people who did these amazing things. But in verse 21, we read about the faith of Jacob. And when we read about the faith of Jacob, the thing that is brought out is how he faced death. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 21. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, he blessed each of his sons, each of the sons of Joseph, and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. You can read about it in Genesis chapter 49 as that life is coming to an end. But he gathers his sons around him. And I don't know, many people are not blessed to choose how they could die. But if I could choose what the day of my departure would look like, it would look like this. Where my family would be gathered around me. And the last thing I could say to them would be a spiritual charge in their life. You seek the Lord. You seek Him as I have sought Him. You seek Him greater than I have sought Him. That's the heritage I want to leave to my children. I may or may not leave them money. I may or may not leave them a bunch of bills. Right? I may leave them a new car. I don't know all the things that I may leave. But what I want to leave them is my faith. That's how you die well.